We don't do introductions in this podcast. We just start speaking because we kind of want to avoid the however we have to look like when doing a podcast. So we look like how we feel. And I really want to ask you, how do you feel about Messi leaving Barcelona? We have not talked about this.
There were so many ways that the first question that was not what I was expecting, but I love it. It's so funny because I know you asked because you know that I have been a big Barcelona supporter for many years with many proud articles of clothing. I honestly think though that Barcelona changed when Iniesta left. For me personally, he was first it was Xavi and Iniesta, then Xavi left, then it was Iniesta and of course Messi, but mostly Iniesta because I feel like he was just like the heartbeat of that team.
Mm-hmm.
And then Iniesta left, and then I still followed, but not as much. And so when Messi left, I feel like I was one of like the last people to know. I don't honestly, I feel like I've been out of it. Of course I heard quickly, but I wasn't, attached to the news or Twitter or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't too surprised. I'm excited to see him, in a different environment. I'm not the biggest fan of Neymar now that I'm living in Brazil. So I just get this whole different perspective, and I know that they have a bond. And so that's curious. And I'll be watching a curious, fan of his always. I watched him in Copa America, I watched him in the qualifiers for the World Cup. I'm excited he's playing with Argentina, but I don't feel attached to him at Barcelona anymore, which if you had asked me that, a few years ago, very different answer, probably a little emotional.
Yeah, he got emotional. I saw him in his debut. It felt weird. Just, the impact of newness, novelty. But I really wanted to ask you, and we didn't have the chance to talk about that because we reunite today in conversation through this podcast. And for people who don't, in Spanish we have said this in prior episodes, but this podcast called Que No Caiga, I will explain the name later. It corresponds to this corresponds to the project we started seeding and watering for the past year, and so called Fútbol Infinito. People can find the description below somewhere. And we thought that this podcast could to transmit, the values and what we like about looking at football, or the possibility of regenerating football in our hearts first, in our minds, and how that could look like on the field and outside of the field, but in this reality. So we chose this format, and this, I feel happy that we did, because this reunites us in conversation and to speak about life through soccer, and I think that speaks to the heart of the project. Just try to figure out the most loving way to live life through soccer, through football. So for people to have context about this, and I specifically, I love speaking with you, and I specifically want to see if you feel up for speaking about the gender, because we lack of that. Almost all episodes, but one we recorded with all men, and I wanted to have another gender expression and sexual expression, speaking about what it means, what it means for you, what it has meant for you, and not only for you as a player, but also as a coach. We can speak about our shared work later, but as a coach and as an observant of soccer in so many cultures, in all continents, and I wonder if you want to go there.
Definitely will go there. Happily, with enthusiasm and warning.
Yeah. Uh, I don't, I don't have a specific question. I just want to know, what
Mm.
happens as Nora in
You
soccer.
know what comes to my mind, like first is because it's coming from you, and I it was one of the most like, can you hear that background noise? Is that okay?
Okay, I
You can
mean,
hear it.
we can hear it, but not. It doesn't bother.
I can adjust it if
Nah,
it
it's
does.
okay.
So let me know.
Yeah.
So I think like the image that comes to mind is playing with you on that field, like a little field in Jalapa, the little court, futsal court, or small sided court, and canchita, and me being one of, I think, over however many days we saw maybe 3 women,
Uh-huh.
and none of them had many years of experience playing, like or were experienced training in football in a space that allowed them to grow in the way that we think, what does a football player do with their feet, what does a football player do with their body, etc., all those traditional kind of ideas about what a football player looks like. Whereas me, on the other hand, like grew up with a lot of opportunities to develop in those ways that society says, like, that's a football player, that's someone who knows what they're doing, etc. And being a woman who, in a country, in a community where you don't often see those two things add up, woman plus fitting into the box of a traditional idea of what a football player can do with their body and their feet, etc., just a lot of reactions from vocal, verbal, like facial,
Yeah.
a lot of stuff happening. If I did something good, quote unquote, if I made a mistake, if I got fouled by someone, just like every moment was an event for me. So like I just felt like, and that's not the only time, but I think of that because I'm talking with you. And I, like, when I was younger, I used to experience those moments with a little bit of like satisfaction, because I think it fed a little bit my kind of young ego of, oh yeah, like I know how to do this, and I can be, the woman that convinces you that women can play. But then I think over time, what became more prominent in my mind was like, let's just stop defining being good at football in this way. Like, let's just change that. Who's stopping us from changing that? I'm not going to the World Cup tomorrow. Who's going, like, the people that I'm playing with, we're not going anywhere. We're staying right here. So why can't we just make this more inclusive, enjoyable for everyone, and not just the people who fit that traditional box of, that's what a football player does with their body, that's what their body looks like, that's what feet can do, that's what their head can do, etc., etc. So yeah, it's been an interesting transition, and you've been a big part of that, I feel like, with me traveling and playing and discussing.
I think like we worked like 5 hours in training, and then we spoke for 6 or 7.
I
Like
think so too.
till
Like, that was
midnight or
my
something.
training.
Yeah.
That was my real training.
I remember that week, when you came and you played, and I, after all the conversations we have had about, all these prescriptions of how soccer should look like and what we value and competition, and I think all those led us here actually. But I remember to this project, I mean, to this podcast and project, and I remember that week, and I felt so tense. I felt so tense because I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable, but we went into a microculture that, that little field that that they didn't have the conversations we had. They didn't have the understanding we had reached throughout 2 or 3, 4, 5 years. And I felt tense, and I cannot imagine, I don't want to assume, and I cannot imagine the experience for you in this case and for women in general about like the closeness of of that image of a woman playing, and just wanted to voice that. And yes, it's just grabbing something that you said. We do our best to not do prescriptions in this podcast. Like we don't mean to say, yeah, football players or soccer players, football players should not look like this, and they should look like this, or coaches shouldn't look like this and they should look like this. Like, because I think if you consider soccer as an art form, then no prescriptions we can find valid. Like we just want to create a space for suspending how it has happened until today, in order to make room, just to make room, and see what wants to emerge. And if the same thing wants to emerge, then we will not fight it, but at least when we start valuing different stuff, like like you said, enjoy, like joy and peace, and make it fun for everyone, then the ways in which we get there change. Just echoing a little bit of what you said.
I think you said you didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, and that just kind of reminded me that I think having you there and knowing that we had reached certain agreements and certain understanding, I think that made me feel better in those moments. But that also reminded me that there have been so many moments where I haven't had someone who kind of has that mutual understanding, or even like another woman to play with me with a bunch of men, so that we could at least kind of connect with each other. Because I often feel like if there are 2 women and 10 men, then like they're comparing us, and it's like, who's better? They have to guard each other. Like it's just just feels segregated mentally, physically, etc. And it put me off, and I'm obsessed with this sport, and I never stopped playing. But it did definitely do something to my kind of psyche around the game and how I approached it. There have been moments where I've been invited to play, and as the only woman, and I've said no because of bad experiences. And that is something that like people who know me would be shocked at if I ever denied an opportunity to play, just because of that kind of environment and that culture. And then I also think about, so like if I have felt safe with like from time to time, whether it's been with another woman who's a friend and we're playing and we're like, whatever to all that noise, which has also happened. Someone like you who's a friend who, is a male, and we've communicated about, all of the different kind of cultures and identities and contexts of this environment that contribute to the way people feel. That made me feel better. But then I feel about like all the women who don't have that ever, and grow up because I didn't grow up in a culture that was like that. I grew up in a culture where more girls played than boys, and where the women's national team has, World Cup championships, and the men do not. And so it's a different, so then traveling and experiencing cultures where a woman playing was like a form of protest almost, just by stepping on that field. Like, what is happening, and how can I like understand more about this and understand more about my role in it, and how can I be a better kind of supporter and not a competitor with these women? How can I, create space regardless of what they can do with their feet and what they can't do with their feet, whether they can score a goal or not, like all of the kind of traditional expectations we have when people step onto a football pitch. And there's so much more that I can do, and there's so much more that I want to do, and there's so much more that this world can do. And they're like little things, right? Like how can we create the agreements that you and I had over however many years in like, a couple minutes before the start of, a fun game? Like that's hard stuff, because you and I worked hard at that. But I do think there's probably bits and pieces that we can pull out of that would add value.
I wanted to ask, like, how can we create that safe space for women? And I think you actually kind of started you started mentioning, like, if we start moving out or moving away from how soccer should look like those expectations of good player, bad player, that starts creating a space for creativity, and that it feels welcoming. And but at the same time, I think that, as you have mentioned, women have specific, like, obstacles, or female persons have specific obstacles in doing this. And I don't want to ask, like, how can we do it, but I would like to know, in the spirit of not prescribing, like, do this, go and do this, but, like, when have you felt, or what happened with me at that time, that you felt safe? Like, what did you find that might give us an idea of something we could practice if we felt inspired?
Good question. I think with you, it's a bit different because there's just trust, though maybe that's part of it as well. And unfortunately, that's something, fortunately, like, just because of how a lot of us humans behave, like, trust just takes time to build. As my work as a coach, the work that we've done together in many different places, we work with coaches on the ground to, ideally, in kind of the most, what we would call, like, successful, quote unquote, environments of sport and play, they build trust with kids and young people and adolescents and young adults and older adults, anyone really who plays in their space. And that trust comes with time. And I think what does that trust look like? I think there's also way too many examples where that trust is kind of converted into a form of power that can very easily be abused. And we see that a lot as well with coaches. I think like I almost said real trust, but, like, I guess trust just looked so different for everyone. And I wonder if some of the reason that I felt, like, safe, comfortable, like I could trust you in those moments of, whether it was my insecurity, whether it was just frustration or anger, whatever was happening on the field at that time, whatever I was hearing, like, I knew I had someone on my team, like my team, not just like my football team, but like my team, who was going to support me. And maybe that, with you and me, like, there's so many different things that play into that, right? Like, there's just, like, there's language, there's, the two of us are excited to question things, and we don't just accept things as, this is all from my perspective, of course, we don't accept things as, they are just because that's the way they are. We want to explore and understand and dissect and investigate some more, and sometimes investigate too much. And I think with, like, and that works for you and me, but then of course every single individual will have their own set of kind of conditions that they probably, a lot of us don't even really know or haven't really labeled kind of explicitly, that make us feel safe and that make us feel like we can trust what's about to happen, not only the person, but, like, what's about to happen in this space. And I think a lot of women and girls, in my experience at least, do not step on that pitch, even if they're invited, because they don't trust what's about to happen. Like, it just feels like it's, like, either they've learned that they don't identify with that, so they don't like it. So it's now like a like dislike. They like it, or they think they could like it, but they don't feel safe because of some cultural condition, family expectation, social expectation, et cetera, et cetera. And so, what we try, right? We can try to create an environment where every individual that steps on into that space, regardless of where, they're coming from and what identities they hold, feels like they can be part of it and enjoy it, contribute and benefit from it, because they're all their different identities are respected in that space and they can trust what's about to happen. I think it's possible. I also think it's really slow. And I think that's also part of the challenge, because I think when people show up, most people who show up to a kind of traditional like pickup game or a football training or a park, that's, you know, what we do a lot in Brazil is we go to the park, there's people playing, we get on a team, and then we rotate, you know, when goals are scored. You don't really want to wait. No one wants to stop that. And so it's really, it's like with football culture as it is, right? As what I'm speaking to, it's, I would say it is like creating a new culture with an existing culture that is so strong and rigid is very difficult. I also think it's possible and wonderful. And you know, that's why I wanted to be part of this. And it's what I try to do with the work that I kind of engage in every day. And I would love to, you know, I'm kind of not answering this because I don't have the answers. But I would love to like explore strategies to create trust, not like in a rushed way, but like in an agile way, and get playing, and then like keep creating trust as we play, and then like whatever that looks like. So it's not like we have to sit and discuss, you know, what makes everyone feel safe for however many minutes and then play. It's like something that kind of works more in the rhythm of, you know, what we love about football, which is movement and activity.
I think that sometimes we rely in Western cultures, especially, we rely too much in explanations, right? Like you want to create experiences where you feed the rational, and you think that'll get you all the way into embodying whatever you want to see happening. And I've seen that fail over and over, because you can, you know, understand something, feel clear about an idea, and your body doesn't know how to, your emotions don't know how to, and at the end you don't incorporate that, you do not embody that. And I speak about this in order to also clarify that to create these safe and trustful spaces, we need to create experiential distinctions that of course include the rational, but transcend the rational into other domains of human experience that we need in order to actually create these safe spaces, right? And I think I hear you saying that also we have, like in our case, we have like relational trust between two human beings, right? That we have cultivated in spite of the culture, right? Like in spite of all these external forces and vectors, like we try to maintain our relationship in a space that suspends those and allows other social codes and other stuff to emerge. And also besides that relational trust that takes time and experiences together, I also think that structure conditions, structure prescribes, right? And I think a lot of this work that we starting like playing with these ideas of Fútbol Infinito and all of this has to do with how can we create a structure that not only values these things, but can actually provide from structure these experiences. Like how can we create an infrastructure that allows this to emerge? And I don't have an answer, right? You know, but I have an example. For example, when you play ultimate frisbee, have you played?
I have played enough, I think, but not frequently. But I've heard good things.
So I started playing a couple of years ago, and I knew the game since like 2012 or something, and I started playing more actively 2 years ago in a team, and we went to tournaments and stuff. And at the end, you sit in a circle with other people from the other team, right? With the other, you merge teams and you sit together, and each team like evaluates the other team in some categories that have to do with honesty, with attitude, with kindness, with knowing the rules, etc., etc. For those who don't know, Ultimate Frisbee doesn't have a referee, or at least in most experiences, they don't have a referee. And at the end, you sit in a circle, and at the end, you choose the MVP. That social code comes from, like conventional sports, and you also choose the person that embodied best spirit of the game. That means the kindest, the person who maybe enjoyed most, who told the truth, who felt open to dialogue, who admitted their mistakes, etc., etc. And at the end of the tournament, a team gets a medal for the best spirit of the game. And we medals mean competition. Like you compare two others in order to see who did best in any value scheme. I mean, scoring more goals and receiving less, or behaving kinder than the other, or more honestly than the other, right? Which we want to avoid as well. But I just want to make this visible, to explore the idea that when you have other, when you start measuring what you treasure, other things start happening. Instead of treasuring what we already measure, like who scores more goals and who scores less, like when you start putting your values into metrics and experiences and make that visible and create feedback loops about those values, then behavior changes. And I see this as a hint of a structural change that we could insert as people in sports in order to facilitate shift in behavior. And the other thing that I mentioned, not having a ref, like when we play our pickup games, or when we used to play our pickup games with CAC, coaches across continents, for those who don't know, we didn't ref on purpose, so that people talked and they practiced what what not cheating looked like, and how do I feel when I have a conflict and I wanted to get that goal, but at the same time I know that I don't want to lie, and how that looks like, how can I engage in conversation with all these forces. And just processing out loud is structural stuff that we have explored and that we might explore in order to create these safe spaces for female players in football, and also like everyone else, but female in this particular context.
I'm curious just to understand, do those medals in Ultimate Frisbee, like do they also get a medal for the teams who win in the traditional way of winning?
They do.
Like who win the tournament?
Yeah.
And is there any prize other than a medal? Is there points? Is there a ranking system or anything like that, or prize money or anything like that in these tournaments?
I've done amateur tournaments, so I don't know. When I went, we just had everyone got a medal, and then we had these two big categories of the one who won the matches, and then who had the best spirit of the game, or however you translate that into English, espíritu de juego.
And do you think that the players value both medals equally in Ultimate Frisbee? Just because if that's part of the culture, I'm curious if that's felt.
I have played in very few, but the team that wins the spirit of the game, they usually don't win many games.
Yeah.
And I see their correlation, a very interesting correlation, because they just have a lot of fun, maybe they don't expect to win, so they just enter relaxed and they just help each other and they have fun. And when they get the medal, they just they cheer and they go in a sense, I would say, yeah,
Yeah.
but most importantly, when you play against like any team that I've played, they actually value honesty, and they actually like help you
Yeah.
out, and they help you with the rules. And so I think they have embodied and integrated this spirit of the game in the culture.
Very cool. Yeah, that's why I asked those questions, because like it would be, I mean, this is very much more like what I would call quote unquote like high performance sport, the places where, I mean, we've just come off of the Olympics and the Paralympics, and medals are given and prize money is given for different medals. And there's some countries that have just started. I think the US has just started giving the same amount of money for the Paralympics as the Olympics. Which is again like a cultural, structural value shift. Like we can decide to literally, with monetary value, like assign the same value to these different things. Of course, that's a very particular space, and not, one that I'm closely affiliated with, as much as I'm affiliated with more like grassroots sport. But I do think it's interesting. I also like, I mean, I grew up in an environment that was incredibly competitive. And I remember people ridiculing the person who won in what in English we call the sportsmanship, but I much prefer spirit of the game, because we don't say sportswomanship if it's a female, it's just sportsmanship, another gendered word. And yeah, just like ridicule, like, oh great, like we got sportsmanship, and like just so competitive that like there was no value assigned at all, almost like negative value, almost like embarrassment. It's like, wow, we're so bad that like they gave us like the pat on the back award. And I just like laugh now, because that's the culture that I come from, and the culture that I'm like working with to, a lot of people in that space that I work with, and we're working very hard to shift that culture and that attitude, because we know how much harm it creates, how much hurt it creates in this world. But it's like I feel that almost, I'm 31 years old, I feel that almost like it's fresh in my mind. Like I remember when my team got a sportsmanship award at a tournament, and we were like, no, we don't want
yeah.
So yeah, no, I think it's possible, and I would love to see it happen in ways that we're not used to, so that there's no like oh, that I have associations with that already, you know what I mean? So like new cultures and new ideas that are just fresh. And I like some examples of that, again, more in kind of traditional sports world, but I'm in Brazil, and so I'll speak to an example here. Like football, as I'm sure most people listening know, is quite a game here, very popular, and it's very male dominated. Like I'll never forget, slight kind of tangent, I'll never forget when I did my first, I do kind of trainings for leaders, and I never forget the first time I did a training. And one of the things I asked was, like, we did this kind of warm-up game, and I asked, as you know very well, Ruben, I did a warm-up game, Circle of Friends, and I asked, like, when they kind of exchanged places in their warm-up, to kind of shout out the name of a football player, a Brazilian football player. Men. And in my mind, like, this was 2016, I was coming to Brazil for the first time. Like the only Brazilian, other than like Pele and maybe a couple Brazilian men, like I only knew Marta. Like she's like, that's the only Brazilian football player that existed for me. And no one said her name. I'm in Brazil for the first time. Like, what is going on right now? And so, yeah, so being here, I've worked with groups that instead of using football to engage, girls and women, they use rugby, which at first I thought was kind of shocking, because I was like, wait, rugby? Because where I'm from, rugby's not very popular. What I've heard about rugby is that it's also male dominated. So it was like, are you just creating another male dominated, massive, culture with opportunities to be sexist and misogynist? And they were like, no, it's actually very neutral here, because it doesn't exist. So we can kind of create it for the first time. There's like a rugby culture of like camaraderie, and I think sometimes it's seen as like a fraternity, so like changing that into a bit of, I guess the alternative would be sorority or like sisterhood, where they can have that kind of shared passion for what they do, but they also look out for each other, their friends, etc. And so I know a lot of organizations here in Brazil at least have seen success just choosing another sport and starting from zero, and they can create what that is. So I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to be involved with Fútbol Infinito, because it's a challenge. Like it's the most like gendered sport in the world. It is so like, dominated. Obviously, I mean, and it's funny saying that because I grew up again in probably the only country in the world where it was gendered the other direction. It was gendered towards women instead of towards men. And so yeah, I mean, I love that challenge, but in my mind, I'm still like, what does that look like? Like, what is that? I want to play, and I've seen it, and like, there's ideas, but I feel like there's still so much more possibility, because the work that I do and, that we did together, we changed the game. Like, it's not quite football anymore. You know what I mean? Like, we're changing the rules, which we can, who says we can't? We're talking about social issues. For example, one of my favorite activities to kind of describe verbally, because it's hard to describe a lot of our activities, is a game of football, but everyone's walking. If someone scores a goal, only that person can run. And then we see, what does that person do? So now we have a game, one person's running, maybe they score again and again and again and again and again, but we still only have one person running. So then we see what happens on the pitch. Does that person start to realize, oh, actually, I want to get my teammates running too. How can I, now that I'm the one who can run, can I pass them the ball? And we don't interfere with that. We let that unfold however it needs to unfold, see what choices they make, and see what they start to value. Do they value scoring more goals, or do they value getting their team the choice to be able to run, right? So that's a bit of structure. And of course, we then, as we link that with whatever social issue emerges, and often it's gender. Often we think of, okay, what does running represent in this game? Opportunity, education, privilege, power, freedom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, so many different answers can come from that. Who has more of that? Like, who might, someone running represent? Could also be, a white woman. I'll raise my hand. Like, absolutely. And so it's one of my favorite games, because it can also talk about like intersectional equality and intersectional, justice. And but that's a bit of structure, but everyone's walking, and people mostly don't show up to a football session ready to walk. They want to move and they want to play. So I do love that idea, and I do love that game, but I also see that for people wanting to coach or play football, it might still be like an obstacle. It might still be it's like too much structure. So I am curious if there are like new ideas and different ways that we can build in structure like that shifts the value, but still kind of maintains the integrity of, a sport that so many people love.
I laughed because I remember, both cases where people like really valued other people scoring and having the capacity to run again or to start running, but others when they just go and score as many goals as they could. And a bit like beyond judging them for whatever choice, just it shows the values. And I spoke with Santi. I think you remember him from Ubuntu, where we ate salads when you came. Maybe you don't. A friend. He came to the show, and we spoke about like we went through that play where Luis Suarez would just do a handball on the goal line at the 118th minute against Ghana, and then they won in penalties. And we said like we will not judge this guy, but what does he value? What does this person value? And I think that instead of, as I said, prescribing, we have to ask, what do we value, and how can we make this a reality? I thought when you spoke, like, I mean, I think we chose soccer because we like it, and we chose football because we have seen also the cultural weight and gravity that it has. And I think that if it happens in soccer, I think it could spread like rapidly, and it could, become a reality in other spheres of life that look like current football, soccer. I mean soccer. Um, so yeah, I I love it. I love the work that you do, that we used to do in CAC, like on field. I find that one of the most fun and impactful ways inside the sports structure as we know them. And I always missed. I always felt curious. What would happen if we had a space where we would play the games constantly, directly with children? Because we mostly would work with coaches and teachers and social workers and other people that work with kids and youth. But I wonder how, like how a culture might change if we just continue doing this for 5 years in the same place, like 10 years. Us, with the coherence that we have reached in teaching these games, facilitating these games. And I think I see this as an opportunity to maybe get to a place where we practice for a while. And now that we speak about the structural stuff, Fútbol Infinito has some DNA, that what we thought could shift from structure, how we know soccer, football today. And we have like three. We have intentional culture creation, these that we speak about, like how can we create a culture that we value. We have self-direction, because we think that if you create a structure where you have centralized authority by default, lots of other social codes, including punishment and rewards and competition and all of those things that we want to explore beyond, they might just repeat. So we believe that self-directedness, people having the capacity to choose what lights them up in this sports experience, can actually not only lead the way to like higher relevance and performance and joy, but also like it would create a balanced, trust-based environment instead of power-based environment. And we don't have an attachment to not having authority. Like, you can teach me something that I don't know, like circumstantial teaching or circumstantial authority-based dynamics we can enjoy when we have intentionally chose to engage in them. And I just mentioned this for people that don't know the project, that might want to just take a look and do it. We also speak about, like including families, because maybe we do something on the field and then they get home and the dad says to the daughter, why did you play soccer? That's a male sport. No. And we have seen that a bunch in India, in Mexico, and all over, so yeah, just a couple of pillars, a couple of genes of this DNA that we don't like. We don't say you should do it. We don't even know how to do it ourselves, but we started, like chewing on some stuff that we think that if we don't suspend, nothing will happen. Like nothing would actually shift, and we will keep people posted on what we find in this.
I want to play.
Yeah, I want to play too. We approached the end of our talk. An hour seems too short when we have cultivated the capacity to speak for 8, 9, 7, a bunch of hours a day. Yeah, thank you for taking the time. I know you have a busy schedule and traveling around in a different time zone, and we really appreciate that you took the time to
traveling around on my Zoom calls, my Zoom.
Yeah. yeah. Do you guys have a like an intention objective of, or I mean, will you go back on field soon? How does that look like for you in CAC?
So we are on field. I think the pandemic catalyzed something that we always wanted to happen. Local coaches that have been with us for many years,
Cool.
Just leading trainings.
Cool.
And so that's a huge part of our budget now, is just giving a lot of stipends out to our like regional kind of teams of coaches, people, David Mula's leading trainings in
nice.
all over East Africa, Lina and Daniela in
Beautiful.
Latino America. Lina is taking over Colombia, Daniela is taking over Peru. Yes. And many more. And so I think that has been amazing. I think selfishly we all want to travel and get on field again. I'm hoping to in Brazil at some point. It's still a little bit, COVID hit Brazil quite hard, as it did many places, and so it's still kind of inching our way back to what that looks like. And in the meantime, just finding very, very silly ways to do trainings online. And I will share my favorite rule, and I'm like,
please do.
Like, I'm so proud that I thought of this, and I don't know how I thought of this, but and it was one of those things that you think of and you're like, I have no idea this is gonna work. It could be an absolute disaster. But if it does work, it's brilliant. And I think you'll like it. And you might do something similar. So the idea was it's kind of like I like many people, I'm sure, in the pandemic, we're doing workout videos. And I was doing this one workout video, and like whenever they wanted, if they were in the middle of an exercise, they could shout or do interrupt. And it was like, we had to do 5 burpees. And I was like, what if we did something like that during a Zoom, but like anyone had to do it, and we would have to stop and do 5 to 10 seconds of like dancing, movement, noise making, stretching, like whatever anyone wanted to do. And we could use like reaction, but then we ended up realizing that so we started with this symbol, the party time symbol, but then we realized that people weren't picking up on it quick enough, and it would start to be like more of an interruption because you'd have to like cut someone off. And so we would now say, during a moment of silence, like if there was like a pause, you would shout. We use boom shakalaka. Then we use, we asked them if they had a word. They use, in Mexico, they use carne asada. And so like every time we said carne asada, we would just run, which is funny because we're vegans. So it worked brilliantly. And we made kind of agreements to not, do it too often. I think that was what I was worried about, that people would just do it like every 30 seconds. It was great. It was really good. So yeah, that's really what I spend my time doing, is thinking of silly ways to make Zoom more interesting.
You have one of the most amazing jobs in the world. How to invite tonterías into serious spaces. Yes. I love it. Yeah. I hope we can play together soon in person. I miss you. And for people who want to know more about your work, we will also post the link of Coaches Across Continents. Beautiful organization, beautiful work that I had the honor to also participate in. Anything you want to say before we say adios?
Just thank you for having me. Always a pleasure. Always. I feel like we could, keep going for another however many hours. I'm excited about Fútbol Infinito. I wanna stay involved in whatever capacity makes sense, if I can contribute. And I'm excited to play one day with the Fútbol Infinito culture and agreements and everything. It's amazing. So thank you for having me and for valuing my voice. I appreciate it.
Yeah, as always. I love you. I'll see you soon. Yeah, I'll stop recording now. Ciao.